Okay, so my itinerary for this presentation, we're going to talk about who I am, why am I here, why do I have any credibility to speak here, my design work, RGD, and how that's impacted my career, and my top 7 portfolio tips. And then we'll finish off with Q&A. So, who am I? My name is Victor Szeto. I'm born and raised in Toronto, which I didn't realize was kind of a rare thing until I kind of grew up and was like, oh, not everybody's from here. But I went to York, Sheridan's Bachelor of Design program, and graduated in 2005. And I'm actually really curious, is anybody from that program here? Raise your hand. Oh, I can't see everybody's hands. I can't see my cursor, so I can't tell. But maybe after this is done, I'll get a little bit of a poll. But the program is, I don't know what the word is. It's finishing. It's not going to continue for too much longer, but it was a fantastic program. I love the fact that it was like a university and college dual education. So that's where I graduated from. I'm currently the creative director at Green Living Enterprises. It's a marketing agency out of downtown Toronto, all working from home right now. But if anybody's from George Brown, they have their new campus on Queens Quay. So our office is like the tower next to it. I'm also a freelance designer, and I'll talk a little bit about that because living in Toronto is very expensive. And like Rupsha mentioned, I'm the RGD's treasurer and chair of certification committee. So just a little quick note about why I'm really excited to talk about portfolio tips is because part of what I do in the committee is review portfolios. So I'm really happy to share what I've learned from that and to take any questions about my portfolio presentation. So to start off, I graduated in 2005. There was a really bad recession shortly thereafter. I know all of you guys are kind of working through a recession that's coming up, so it can, just keep working. You're going to be fine. But the place that I worked at the beginning was called Farc Limited. They are a architectural design company based out of Toronto, and they're well known for amusement park design around the world, but they do a lot of big projects internationally. I confess I didn't actually know who they were when I applied, but as I was there for the 5 years, it was like, oh, like this is really cool. When I first started there, one of the first projects I worked on were environmental graphic projects that were concepts for things like this entrance for a hotel in Pattaya, Thailand. I also got to work on the signage and graphics for an amusement park and resort in South Korea called Gwangju World. These are actually 2 shots here. I don't know if they come across that way, but this was in Malaysia, and it's a family entertainment center where the brand HIT kind of outfit this humongous space, and I got a chance to develop the graphic applications for all their surfaces, basically, all the walls, all the signage. So it was really fun to work with a brand, but then, make it big and kind of fun for the family. We did some work locally. So this is one of the last projects I did. And it's for, at the time, it was renovation, not anymore now, but it's for the Batcave at the Royal Ontario Museum. I love this project because I got to work with some of the curators there, and it's still there. And it's actually, I find it kind of rare that a lot of the work that we do is permanent, but I can always check it out if I ever go there and say, hey, I worked on that. But as a generalist and somebody that wasn't sure that that was something I would do for the rest of my design career, I decided to leave Farc and moved on to Green Living Enterprises. They're a marketing agency out of downtown Toronto. And at the time, they were known for a magazine called Green Living Magazine, and also a trade show called the Green Living Show, which I think RGD actually was one of the exhibitors there. But currently, this is sort of a roundup of the brands that we work with. We do a lot of work in the environmental space, also with sustainability and corporate responsibility. Like I said, we did the Green Living Show. So that was 3 days out of the year. And what was interesting about Green Living is that we're kind of like this hybrid in-house, but agency. So I always thought it was really interesting to be able to kind of live these two worlds and to kind of be in-house, but not like entirely, but kind of be agency, but not entirely. So it always kept the work interesting and local. Like it was coming from working on all these projects that I actually never got to go to or never got to see, to actually seeing something through from the beginning to the end. Um, when I first started there, I did a lot of work for a creative director who was very editorial based. And I worked on a magazine, and that was actually like the first time I felt like, oh, I'm actually understanding how typography works, like 5 years after graduating. So, it's never too late, but it was a really weird but a rewarding experience to actually be nitpicked at every single small detail, because at the time it felt really like weird, but it was like, oh, I get it now. And like your eye gets a little bit better, and your ability to like pick out typographic issues hone in. So that was one of the projects. And then I'm currently working on a lot of projects with TD, another bank. We did their recent year in review for TD Friends and Environment. And like I said, I'm kind of glossing through this work right now, but if you care to check it out, you can check out the website at Green Living Enterprises. I also want to touch on the fact that I do a lot of freelance work still, and I started while I was in school. Toronto was and still is a really expensive place to live. So, and I kind of lived on my own, and in order to sort of like finance your living expenses, but also like have some play money to go on vacation and all that kind of stuff. I just took on some work. I did it while I was at school. I was always able to sort of like just pick up projects here and there and kind of do word of mouth. But there was a certain point where I didn't have enough time in the day to like work during the day and then work at night. So part of the reason why I'm still at Green Living, and 10 years is a long time to be in one company, is I reached a threshold where some of my freelance work got too big to do outside of my day or night hours. So I've been taking in freelance projects into my full-time work, which means that I kind of like bring in work. I get to work on the proposals to price out stuff, and then I can sort of not do as much freelance work at night. But what it did and what it helped me to do was to kind of test out my creative juices that weren't bound by a boss, or it wasn't bound by things that big organizations bind you by sometimes. Like a lot of these are small local organizations where they don't have designers to rely on, and it was really great to kind of be like to be thanked for doing work for them, and it was rewarding in that sense. So there is a breaking point where it's like, okay, you just don't have enough time in the day, but that's kind of how I have advanced my career, and how RGD's kind of helped with filling in these roles that I've had, being a full-time designer, but also a freelancer. So I'm going to jump into RGD now, because that's the whole point of why I'm here. I'll start off with the fact that I was an student RGD by default, being part of the York Sheridan design program. And I remember, Hillary, those days when you came to our auditorium and talked about RGD, and I was like, oh, this is this is so good to know that once you graduate, like there's still a place, there's a community where you could learn things. So it was always like present, and she's still there. Hillary's still there, bugging me about stuff, like sharing what I've learned today. Certification, and I bring this point up because I thought it was really good to, I think it's really good to tell all of you students where when I first started working at Farc, I don't think they actually knew what RGD was, but they actually supported the idea of professional development. And they were a company that helped finance my certification. And I want to impart that um, sort of like if as you students like graduate and look for work, I think it's important to like ask if anybody actually has RGD staff. I don't know if this is a great question to ask. Like, would you pay for my RGD certification right off the bat? Because first of all, you kind of have to work for a couple years. But knowing that there are other RGDs on staff, or if you think that they might be supportive of helping to finance your certification, like it's really good to know that because those are, I think, the companies that find design not just as a value, but important to help your growth and your development as a designer. So as I was working, it was like, you're kind of in a little bit of a bubble where there was a certain point that, you can't talk about your boss or your coworkers with your coworkers. So RGD has a mentorship program that I tapped into, and I was kind of like sandwiched on both ends, meaning I would ask to have a mentor, but then at a certain point, I became a mentor. And it's really, I find it really valuable to kind of play both sides because when you are looking for a mentor, you need advice. You need somebody who kind of knows better and to kind of not be in your bubble and not be part of your, like you just need an outsider voice. So it's really good to get that impartial advice. But then as you become a mentor, I kept remembering it's like, oh, I'm now giving advice. Like I should also follow the advice that I give and not be a big fat hypocrite. So it's really a valuable resource that they have. And I don't know if you have mentorship for students, but Hillary, if you want to weigh in on that, she's nodding. So there is mentorship for students. So I think it's a really valuable program to participate in because it's just like, where do you get advice from that isn't your teachers or your peers? Like you just need somebody outside. And I'll also do a little bit of a plug, being part of the certification committee. There is a certification mentorship where if you want to become certified, I think there's a program developing to help you um, ask somebody or to develop somebody to help you be accountable for the certification process. And just a little quick aside, when I was certified back in 2010 or even 2009, we had a study group, and I don't think that can happen now because of pandemic. But it was such a really great kind of time where I still talk to some of the certification um, group people because they've been part of committees and they're also involved in RG. So it's a nice little like, community where you're kind of all in the same boat. Um, and yeah, if you are hoping to become certified, that is also a program that is developing, and you can get some mentorship for that because we can't do groups. So um, along my career, I've done some portfolio reviews, thanks to staff from RGD asking. So that involves like events that we used to have, and there would be events throughout the year where there'd be like groups of students and other designers, and we'd just be paired with students to review their portfolios. And I did that for quite a number of years. It developed into with the events, it developed into being a panelist or a moderator. And it was just sort of like another step into contributing to RGD and, being part of the community and just getting your work out there, but also like seeing what other designers are doing. One of the key events that RGD has is Design Thinkers. And again, I can't really see all of you, but I'd be really interested to see who has been to Design Thinkers because to this day, I'll still, not know who everybody is. And I don't always know what the programming is. So I'm always astounded by just not having any expectation and kind of just seeing the programming that gets developed and being quite amazed by, like, it's kind of one of those things where the more you learn, the more you don't know. So I kind of feel like design thinkers is one of those spaces where, yes, you do get a lot of designers together, but um, they always bring really great programs to inspire people and to just share like all these things you don't even know about. Um, and then recently I have, yeah, it's weird because I've always been in RGD since certification, but like my involvement was like, as much as I could fit into my day, into my schedule, I was always involved, but it wasn't until more recently that I actually started to think maybe I could be on the board, maybe I could be more involved. So I think what was great was that, like, my story is telling you that you can be involved in so many different levels and so much capacity. Like, you don't always have to be a board member or a committee member. It's great to be that, but it's a matter of contributing how you can. And since being part of the board, and I'll also mention when I was trying to be part of the board, I was so lucky to be part of, like, I skirted in because there was the same number of board uh, like there's enough spots for the people that wanted to be nominated, so I kind of like slipped right in. um, but
Can I
the
just
amount of
can I just explain that? Because they might not know that um,
yeah, please do.
for certified RGDs to get on the board, there's actually an election every year, and certified RGDs vote for who's going to be on the board. So the year that Victor joined, he was acclaimed because there was the exact same number of people that had been nominated as there were positions, which is not often the case. So this year, for instance, there will be an election. Just so
Yes,
everybody is understanding that.
yeah. Like, I wasn't there by because like I was just a body. Like, I did have to try, and I called Taylor. I'm like, what do I do? Like, how do I make sure that it's not just like a default space? But since being on the board, it's actually astounding how much RGD does. Um, Especially because, like, I've been part of it for so long, but it's like, oh my God, the level of programming and I guess the enthusiasm that comes out of people who are participating and volunteering, it's quite amazing in my opinion. So as part of a board member, I'm designated as the role of the treasurer. Um, I mean, I don't know if Hillary knows this, but like, as somebody who does freelance work and also proposals and um, you know, I'm not an accountant and I don't know money like that well, but it is interesting to understand how RGD works as an organization from a financial perspective, because it's just like shit that people don't talk about at design school. It's like things cost money. Time is money as well. So that's been really fascinating. Um, and I'm also the chair of the certification committee. So, like I mentioned before, what we do, we're kind of like the gateway to people who want to be a member of RGD. So we look at all the applications. We also put together and evaluate like the application and how it's accessible to people, that people are able to feel like they can apply from all over Canada. But a lot of what I've done is review portfolios. So without further ado, I want to talk about the top 7 portfolio tips because I think that'll be really useful for you. I just had a portfolio review earlier today, and I'll just get right to it, and I'll field any questions afterwards. So my first tip is to talk about what you're obsessed with, and this is sort of um, along the lines of the question of like, what are you passionate about? What do you like to do? But if you think about it, well, if I think about it as like, what are you obsessed with? It's kind of like, what are you enthusiastic about? What is it that makes you stand out with other people? Because like, this is what you're obsessed with. So for example, my personal obsession is like with organization. Like, I'm a fan of Marie Kondo. My desktop is blank. Everything is in a proper folder. Where I work, I am like the file naming police. And I mean, what this tells me is like, who are you? Like, what is your personality type like? Because we know by default you're going to talk about design, but like, what do you love to do, and what is it that you are so enthusiastic about? Because that's, I think, where your personality shines. And when you talk about stuff, like, it's like, oh, you're a real person. Like, you have things that you really like. My next tip is about sharing lessons learned from failures. Sometimes I like starting off telling students to talk about their portfolio, like telling a story. And with any story, you kind of want peaks and valleys. You want to talk about things that are great, but like, you also want conflict and tension. And to be able to talk about like things that you failed, it gives me a couple of things. It tells me that you can learn from things. Um, it's also really kind of boring to see really polished stuff that's final and everything is success. It's kind of like, that's great, but like, did you learn anything from it? And sometimes like epic failures are the best stories to tell, and they're the best stories to listen to. And if you can share some of your failures and like what you've learned from, um, it helps the reviewer know, and an evaluator know, and somebody who's looking at your portfolio know that you're not like perfect. Like, you can do things, you can learn from it, and you're resilient, and you can pick yourself up. So share lessons learned from failures. Number three, always talk about or ask yourself why. To put it into context, I do see a lot of student portfolios where, just out of curiosity, I'll ask, like, why did you use this font? Why did you use this color? Like, why did you use this reference? Um, and the most disappointing answer that I get is, oh, because I liked it. Like, try not to use that answer. It's a bit of a cop out in a way. It doesn't share what your thinking process is like. Um, and at the end of the day, as you develop as a designer, and if you are presenting with clients, like, you kind of have to have a reason for everything. Part of design, in my opinion, is about like the decision behind why you do things. So if you pick a font, like, give me a reason why. And if you can frame it in a narrative or in a story, that makes it even better. Because part of it is convincing people the reason why you're doing something. So if you can answer why, and it's not just because or because I like it, you're already, winning a little bit. So with every decision, just ask why, and have some sort of substance to the decisions you make. Number four, um, check your spelling and grammar. I think this is one of those basic things that is always astounding to see in um, screen portfolios or printed portfolios. It's like such an easy thing to do on InDesign or whatever you do. Like, just do a spell check. I know that there's considerations with language barriers. Like, I know that there's people who have applied for certification, and English is not their first language, and that's okay. But knowing that you can do a spell check, but also go through and like maybe ask somebody to read through it, it just gives me that extra like reassurance that you've kind of gone through checks and balances to make sure that there's um, things that you've gone through, so that like they're kind of like the basic stuff. Number five, consider the medium. And this is really interesting now because everything is done through a computer. My background is a lot in print. I used to say whenever there was like a in-person portfolio review, if you can bring your print or your magazine that you've designed in person, we really want to see whatever that thing is in the medium that it was considered in. I also bring this up because now that we're doing a lot of the certification reviews online, it's really something that you have to think about, where can you show your work on a screen well? We've had instances before where somebody was showing like their mobile work, but on a phone, but like on the screen. So like, you just can't see anything. So you have to think about like, what's the best way to share your work that really features all the good stuff. And part of it is like practicing, but consider I think nowadays, like everything is sort of like in this small little screen. So if you can make sure it looks well, kind of small-ish, um, that's a consideration. But again, as soon as we're able to sort of see each other in person again, if you bring a print piece with you, that is a print piece like of that size and scale, that's really helpful because then I could actually see the usage of it and like how did you consider scale and stuff like that. Number 6, remember to breathe. Um, it's really funny because for certification, you get half an hour to talk about your presentation. And I think people find that it's not always enough time to share everything that they want to share about. So part of it is like an editing. When you share a presentation, practice it and remember to allow for enough time to talk about what you want to talk about, enough time for people to think about what you talked about, and just to remember to breathe. It's not a race. Well, sometimes it is a race against time of half an hour, but remember that part of really successful presentations is kind of giving that time and space to kind of let people think and to let yourself think. So remember to breathe, give yourself a little bit of, um, you know, space to think and to like create tension. And without further ado, number 7, give yourself permission to do other things in design. Um, I've had to learn that throughout my career where, you know, living in Toronto, being really expensive and designing day, designing at night, it can lead to burnout. And you can't always, uh, you know, take from an empty well. So you gotta have to do other things other than design. It's okay. You don't have to design all the time. And ultimately, like if you're interviewing for work, I also feel like it's interesting to know like what else do you do? Right? Like what interests do you have? It's kind of related to the first tip about like what are you obsessed with too, because it's kind of like you're a real person, you're a whole person, and like there's more than design, and especially if you're coming out of school, you always have something to contribute to the table, and it's kind of like you know you can learn about design, you can learn to be better at design, but what else? What else do you do? So those are my top 7. There's obviously more, but I wanted to make sure it was edited down for this presentation. Um, and yeah, that's it for me. I'm gonna start off. I'm gonna start off with Q&A because I actually want to get to know you all. um, and I wanted to know like what kind of things do you think RGD should cover that doesn't get covered enough in school? So I think I want to see you all, so I'm gonna like collapse my presentation if that's okay, and I want to start like you know having a conversation. So how do I do that? Stop sharing. All right.
I can go first if that's okay with everyone. Thank you for speaking with us. I think I speak for everyone when I say that those portfolio review tips were really amazing. I think we're gonna apply that to our portfolio going forward. I think the
Amazing.
biggest sort of thing that's missing at school, and I don't know if this is the case for all programs, but at my school, it's freelance and really understanding what that is. And that's kind of why I started networking and kind of reaching out to individuals in RGD because I don't really know anything about it at all. And because of the mentorship program, actually, I've learned a lot about it. So this is my second year participating in it, and both years I've gotten really great mentors that have kind of led me down a great path. So yeah, I would just, as a student, learning more about freelance, I think would be really great.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, like I said, I freelanced as I was still in school. I think uh, freelancing is interesting because it takes an entrepreneurial mind. Like, you're basically running your own business, so it's scary. Um, and I'm really glad that you have mentorship because like sometimes you feel like you don't have enough support. Like you're not working under a company that can like pay you every like regular interval. You gotta like invoice and think about you know how to get the next project. So like good on you for being so brave to do that. I don't know if this was already shared with you, but you should get an HST number. An HST number, a business number. One of the good things that one of the good practices I learned at the beginning was to track all your expenses, because as a freelancer, like everything you do can be expensed. Here's another pro tip for you. I loved to travel. Like I worked full time. I never had a gap year. I never was able to like live somewhere else. So the great thing about working full time was that I was able to save up and like travel at least once a year, not this year, but once a year. And one of the things I did, it's like one of those things that like nobody really talks about, but it's totally valid and legal. If you can find a designer from wherever you're traveling from and like ask them if you could like have an informational interview with them or something. It's not like you're specifically asking for a job, but like that actually can count towards like writing off the trip. One of the things that we did early on with RGD, we did the San Francisco trip, and I wrote that off because I met a designer in San Francisco. And I got their card. You know, I have all their information, but you know that means you still have to pay for everything. You still have to pay for your flight, your accommodation. But when it comes to your taxes, you get to deduct a portion of that. And I tried to do that everywhere I went because it was like, why wouldn't you do that? It's perfectly legal. And then it was like, I'm going to China. I'm going to write off a $2,000 airplane ticket.
Amazing.
I didn't know you could do that, but I'm gonna do that from now on. I do have an HST number, but like I didn't know that pro travel tip, so definitely gonna take that.
Well, I mean, you're your own business, and if you talk to other designers in other places, it is a business trip because you are like sharing ideas and talking about stuff, and you never know if it could be a potential project. And that's the other amazing thing. Like once we can travel again, it's like, oh, your network, like that is networking, right? Like the ability to even find somebody in another country is hard enough, right? But to be able to sort of make it worth your penny, I think it's like amazing.
Thank you.
Oh, I want to go back to my first question because I didn't see any of you. Who's from York Sheridan? I'm really curious.
We do have members from York Sheridan. They're just not here today because of other commitments. But there's 2 or 3, I believe, on our committee.
Cool. And then
at least 2.
Who's going? And who's going to the George Brown Queens Quay campus? Just out of curiosity. Oh, yes. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. Where is exactly your company, as you said?
So if George Brown is on the Jarvis side, we're on the Queens Quay side, and we're on the West Tower. So like, you know where the Starbucks is, which is closing, by the way. They're closing that Starbucks. We're in that sort of entrance, and then we're in the West Tower. But I feel sorry for you guys because it just opened, and I think it was only open for like half a year, and then you can't go back. So it's really sucky, but yeah. So yeah, my question was, what else should RGD cover that you feel like there's only so much time in school? And that's actually one of the other things I didn't put in my top 7 tips, but nobody really cares about your marks when you talk about your portfolio. And ultimately, like if people are interviewing students from similar programs, I would implore you to like consider your projects as like a client project. And it doesn't matter what your brief is. If you don't like it, and if you don't even like your project, but you think there's enough in there that you could make it a project that you love, redo it. Like, I don't care what mark you got. I don't care what your outcome was per se with your teacher. It's like, what can you make of it? And you can always go back and like make it the way you want it to and be proud of it, because if you really love that project, that will really show in your portfolio presentation, and that counts more to me than, sorry, but what your teacher thinks. But your teacher there is there as a guide and to like mentor you and to show you how to get to a certain place. But there's only so much time, right? And you can do it afterwards. So if you really want to like continue with a project, like keep going forward with it.
I was gonna speak up. And okay, I'm Chelsea Schmidt, by the way.
Hi,
So I'm
Chelsea.
from, hi, I'm from North Bay. I go to Canadore College, little small town place. Um, Anyways, I was gonna say that I think that at least in my program, we could do with a lot more collaboration. All of the projects that we do, I'm in second year, so I just finished my third semester, so 3 semesters to go, including this one. And all of the projects that we do are individual until you get to third year, and then you have your, can't remember what they're called, but basically your work hours where you do go out and you work with, a client or whatever. So it's similar to freelance, even though I don't think you would be getting paid in that situation. But I
Oh,
feel
it's an
like,
internship, right?
yeah, it's
I
kind of
think
like an
you're talking about
internship.
internship. Yeah.
It's just to get you out there and get you working and give you that experience, which is really good. But I think collaboration is kind of something that's missing because I don't know, like I feel like it brings so much more to the table. I've been listening to a lot of creative pep talk. I don't know if any of you know that podcast. It's so good, by Andy J. Pizza. Um, and he talks a lot about, you can look at being a designer as you're on your own and all of your work needs to be like protected and held to yourself, or you can think of it as this thing that you get to share with every other creative person, and we're all sort of working together to get the art or the design into the hands of the, you know and into the hands of people, regular people. So we're all doing something together. I feel like rather than thinking of it as a contest, which I think a lot of students get that in their head, that like it's a contest, my work has to be the best, rather than sort of working together as a team.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think um, there used to be, what was it called? The designathons. Yeah,
Oh,
I
okay,
think,
I think I've heard of them.
yeah, I don't know if there's a way to do them virtually. Like, obviously, we can't do that in person right now, but I feel like,
I really want to figure that out. I mean, it's been put on hold, but I think that figuring out a way to have collaboration of students across the country on projects for nonprofits would just be so amazing. I mean, it'd be amazing to address what I think Chelsea's very, very astute observation, that this is something that designers do. Designers work in teams, and you don't have that experience really, even within your own little school. Like, these are people and you see them every day, and probably you've seen them for 3 years. And so working with different personalities and different experiences and from different locations would be such an interesting experience.
yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, in the working world, I can say that like there's so much collaboration that happens to like get a project up and running, and it's not
Yeah.
always designers you're working with. You're working with
Mhm.
it's a bit of a push and pull sometimes, especially I've worked with salespeople, and it's always a push and pull. And the ability to work with not like-minded people is such a valuable thing to learn. Because like interpersonal conflict is part of the thing about school that I feel like you can't learn about until you actually do. But yeah, like a international, no, not inter, a national collaboration would be really interesting. And I think it's also just another networking opportunity to like get people from across the country to kind of understand how other people work.
Mhm.
Yeah, that
But
sounds really cool.
yeah. Yeah, but you like once you start working, like you're gonna be faced with a bunch of just random personalities that like I think that's where the real learning starts because
Yeah, very true.
like there's just so many other layers and levels of hierarchy because it's not just student and teacher or student and dean. It's like,
Mhm.
you know, you might be working with intermediate designers and senior designers and the creative directors. So there's all these like levels that you have to navigate around, and
Hmm.
it's good. Like it's good, and we all go through that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Cool. Well, thank you.
yeah. Oh, and I just see in the chat, Christiana has done. Is it Creative Day for Social Good this year or
Yeah, we did Creative Day for
Design-a-thon?
Social Good at Conestoga.
Oh, nice.
So we got together and worked with like groups and did logos and whatever they needed for a bunch of nonprofit companies.
Yeah, very similar to the design-a-thon, definitely.
Design-a-thon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and like we got to meet a whole bunch of people from the industry, and then also working with a client and seeing how that is handled was really interesting. I know some groups had some really demanding clients, and then I mean ours just was happy with a stick figure that I drew. But like, yeah, it was like it's a really good experience, and I think if we could get that going again, that's really beneficial for students. Because I mean, it's scary thinking you're just gonna graduate and go out there. You haven't like done anything yet, so that's a good interaction with a client and a group, like
Totally.
collaboration.
It was a long day though. It was like for me it was a 12-hour day.
Oh my
From 8 a.m. till probably like 2 in the morning.
Oh dear.
Wow.
More than
so-
12.
More than 12, yeah. I lost track of time at one point. Yeah, it was just long. But it was a really great experience, kind of like what Chris said. And it was really like impactful too, because you got to help like a lot of nonprofits that normally wouldn't be able to afford like design services. And my client especially worked in the mental health sphere. So we got to learn a lot about what kind of work that they do too, which was interesting as well.
Yeah.
Are they
just
going to
noticing-
try and do it virtually?
We did it virtually.
Oh, he did it virtually. Oh, interesting.
Oh.
Okay. Who
We
was the
stayed on
Always can be done.
Slack and Discord and Zoom for like hours.
I could fry
It is,
an egg on my computer because it was so hot.
yeah, it was Creative Cloud was crashing.
Oh no.
But the organizers were John Balkis and Mike Powell from Conestoga College.
Okay.
You see
And
Hillary
also
writing this down.
Capacity Canada. It was Terry Gillum from or something from Capacity Canada.
Yeah, it was Capacity Canada as well that partnered with us. And they I think
Terry
coordinated all the
McGuire, no? Terry McGuire?
That's it.
Terry McGuire. Yeah, Terry McGuire. That's his name. I don't remember the Capacity Canada people. It's like a blur.
That's Terry. I'm pretty sure that's Terry. Yeah. Okay, good. I will reach out to them.
Cool. I have another question for you students. I'm really curious to know where you're getting inspiration from nowadays, and like things that are not just Instagram, but like it's such a weird time, and like I'll confess sometimes it's like it's hard to be creative on cue, right? And like I know it's our job, but you know you kind of have to let your brain rest and wander. But I'm really curious, what do you look at for inspiration? Like what, I mean, I'm not saying this is not necessarily like design related. It's just like, what do you do to be creative and be inspired? Because sometimes it's really hard when you're in isolation and quarantine to like be creative. And especially because you're not in a group setting, like you're not in school. So I'm really curious, like, how do you spark that like creativity nowadays?
I can, like, if I can just talk about it for a little. I've been finding it very difficult actually. Like, I'm glad you brought that up. I've noticed a huge difference coming into this school semester than I've seen coming into any of my other ones, just in trying to think of ideas for projects. Because in school, obviously, like most of the time you're given prompts, but you have to come up with like your own company, your own name, and it's a lot more draining than usual. So for me, at least, like looking at Behance and Pinterest and stuff was always like my go-to, but I'm realizing now that it actually is like human interaction and conversations and talking to my peers that inspires me most, which doesn't help your question for right now, but it's just something I've come to like appreciate now that I've been like isolated for so long.
Well, but so can anyone else share what they're trying to, like their tactics on how to get inspired? Because I think everybody's kind of in a similar boat. Like, what do you do? Like, how do you be
I
creative on cue?
my big thing, well, I have two. I have music. I listen to a lot of different kinds of music, and if I fall into a pit where I'm listening to the same kind of music, I'll go out and actively search for a different genre, just so I have something different in my ear while I'm working. And then the other thing, there's two, well, audiobooks and podcasts. I like to listen to those while I'm working too, just because I'll be like, oh, I didn't know that. For instance, there's this one called Wireframes from Adobe, I believe. And there was something about fantasy UX design, which I didn't know was even a thing that existed, but it's really cool. It's like interfaces for things that don't exist, like hologram machines and like Netflix's Black Mirror, like all the crazy machines that exist on that show, people make interfaces for those. And yeah, just like seeking out new information in different ways too.
I like Christiana's chat responses. Disney Plus, Lego, Harry Potter, PS4. Somebody told me about Oculus the other day. Who does anybody know what that is, or does anybody
Yeah,
have
it's
Oculus?
It's a
it's
Tell
VR
me,
thing,
tell me, I
right?
want to know.
VR system.
yeah, it's VR.
Yeah, it's like the VR thing, but I don't know. The last I heard was, weren't they trying to make it so that you would stand in this thing, you wearing the goggles, but then you would also be standing on something kind of like a treadmill so that you could walk, but it would be like a almost like a ball sort of treadmill. So I don't know how that would work, but so that you could walk in any direction, but you're staying still, but you does that make sense? Does that make some kind of sense?
So
I
like an
don't know.
infinity
The
pool where you don't need
the
a lot of
Oculus,
space,
like
but you can move. Oh,
And
sorry.
like,
it's a self-sufficient VR gaming device. It means you don't need a computer or a PlayStation or an Xbox to work it. It's all within the lenses.
maybe I'm thinking of something else.
Hillary, I feel like this might be a new category in the near future. Just start
Yeah.
picking.
I think that we do have somebody who like was a student member who actually works for Oculus. If they're still there, but I have to reach out to them. Yeah.
Does anybody play
Virtual
music?
reality design.
Yeah. I picked up guitar not during pandemic, but years before, but I like listening to music and also playing music. I find that it taps into a different part of the brain too, and you can kind of like close off design for a second and like do something else, and learning something that's completely different can then tie into that later. Like with music, there's elements of rhythm and pace. I think like I always feel like there's things that tie into design that's quite abstract and not like direct, but it's also just like I like to learn new things all the time. If you play music, I think that's a really good little escape.
I don't play music, but I will sing randomly sometimes. Not well. What was I gonna say? Other ways that I time out is like cooking. I've gotten more into cooking. I've given up fast food because I was eating way too much of it. I was like, hey, this has to stop. So I've started actually cooking all of my meals, which it's much better. It's much better once you just sort of get into the rhythm of it. And yeah, just like taking little workout breaks helps a lot. Sometimes I feel like my brain is like goop, and you just have to get away from the desk, get away from everything, and like move your body, get the blood flowing.
I'll confess, when I was working at Green Living, we were close to the George Brown cooking school, and I lived right around the corner. And I was like, oh, maybe I should like take up a cooking class. And I took a knife skills course, and I was like, oh, that's how you're supposed to cut it with a knife. I'm like, I can't believe like 20 something, and I'm now discovering how to like cut things properly. But I mean, you know, as we're all like working from home or whatever, like we definitely need to eat. And part of doing that is to cook. So Hillary, is this now your, the floor is over to you for your cooking show, or?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in progress. I'm making a very fancy pizza right now. The onions are caramelizing.
That sounds
Yes.
amazing.
But Chelsea, you're right. Like we do a lot of screen work, and you have to get off your desk and like move around, and like, you know, there's so much screen that your eyeballs are probably going to melt on there if you don't just like
Yeah. I find it like
take a
it's
step.
so easy to just like spend the whole day without taking that time away because we're just at home. Like it's unless you make yourself, you have to, yeah, you have to make yourself take that time.
I want to ask you a question though, Victor,
Yes,
if that's okay. I mean, I'm
that's what I'm here
fascinated
for.
that you started freelancing when you were in school. Like, how did you get your first clients?
When I was in second year, I got a job at Davenport Perth Neighborhood Center, which is a local community center, and I got a job painting murals. So from there, part of that program was to actually go around the city and ask random businesses, do you want a mural on your wall outside? So that was kind of like the first sort of entryway into learning how to like run a little tiny business for a summer. And then from there, that community center asked me to do like some brochures for their community center. And it kind of just snowballed from there. Like I kind of was eager, and I'm like, yeah, I could do that. And it was like this sort of, yes, sure, why not? Like I was open to taking on, and just from there, it kind of was word of mouth. And I think what I learned from that is these these small organizations, they're all a network to bigger organizations. And it was all like, if you can do work that your clients are happy with, like they talk and they tell people. So I have a domain, but I've never, this is so bad, I've never had to make a website for myself. Obviously, there's a website for the place that I work, but I kind of was just able to just squeeze by with word of mouth. And this is another thing, I didn't put this in the presentation, but like I've never gotten work from cold anything, from cold RFPs. It's always been word of mouth and through people that you network with, or people that you connect with. And I think any work, big or small, it's as I kind of developed through the career, it's less about the projects, as controversial as that might be, and it's more about like who you work with and who you really like working with and collaborating with, and who builds you up and helps you become a better whatever you want to be. So like the work that I did with Farc, it was for such international clients, and it was like such big stuff, but it was also a little anonymous and like, not to disparage them because it was a really great first job, but I didn't quite understand any of it. It was more like, okay, I'll just design for this and that. And it was not until I got into the smaller projects where it's like, oh, like I'm working with an actual person, like, and you get to go through a collaborative process, and talk about like what they like and get to know them. And I think that was really enriching for me as a designer, like less about this nebulous, anonymous thing. But at the end of the day, like the process is also kind of the same. Like you kind of go through a briefing, you understand who they are. Like the process is quite similar no matter the scale. Sometimes the budgets aren't the same. Sometimes the demand and the expectations aren't the same, or the results. But the process is quite similar throughout, in my experience. But yeah, to answer your question, Hillary, it was just small projects that I took on, and I think what helped was that like it was a community network that was tied to other networks, and it kind of just like snowballed from there. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions about Victor and his sort of career journey or the portfolio pieces or certification? Yeah.
I have a question, and I want to put you on the spot a little bit. But what is the coolest thing you've seen in a student portfolio?
Ooh, that's a good question. The coolest thing I saw, I can't remember his name, but it was a couple years ago, and it was for the George Brown Mentorship Program, and he redid MEC. Because at the time, I think MEC was like moving location, and why I thought it was cool is because it was like MEC already did a rebrand. Why are you doing another one? But how he switched up was he wanted to rebrand the interior retail space. So it wasn't just like the flat 3D graphics. Like he actually learned how to work on, I think, SketchUp. So he did like a whole 3D like video walkthrough, and it was like he just went the extra mile and went from 2D to 3D, and then it was like the totality of the space. And that was impressive because it was just like, I think part of it, he also wasn't, design wasn't his first degree either. Like, I think you could tell like there was more that he was going to get out of this program, but just somebody who goes the extra mile and learns beyond the software that he's like expected to learn from school, so that it really demonstrated his thought process and like what his vision was. Like it wasn't just, you know, a photo of this applied on this. It was like, okay, here's the whole freaking store. So I thought that was a lot of work, and it was really impressive, and it was done really well. So that was really mind blowing, in my opinion. I'm not quite sure what he did after that, but that really stuck out. It was above and beyond. I think anytime you go above and beyond, that really is memorable. But it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I think to Victor's point before too, like, I mean, a lot of professionals are seeing a lot of portfolios, whether, I mean, obviously now it's a bit trickier, but, you know, when we do creative directions in May, we'll have a bunch of RGDs and senior designers who are looking at portfolios, and they sign up to do this, so they see a bunch. And I mean, the fact is, a lot of your work is based on curriculum and program and projects that teachers have been giving out for several years. So they've seen the same sort of problem and solutions probably more than once, if not this year, then in past years. So anytime you can take something beyond that, I mean, you kind of already said it, but take something beyond, you know, the expectation, the thing that everybody is seeing over and over again, it is going to stand out.
Mm-hmm. And I think other portfolios that stand out and other mechanisms is, I think personality does go a long way. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about like, what are you obsessed with, right? Because I think that's where you bring out like the quirkiness in yourself, because it's such a weird thing to like present a portfolio to a random stranger. It really is. It's kind of like, you're going to judge my work, like all the time and effort that I've spent in 3 to 4 years I've poured into this. So you know, it's not just your work. And I think when you come out of school, there's always this level of like, we can always mold a student. Like you're not quite like established yet, you're not like finished. So it's a matter of like, can we work with you? Are you somebody that could be fun to work with? Yeah, it's a tough thing. I think, yeah, if you can shine who you are and like show your personality. And here's the other thing that I've noticed with the certification portfolio. Sometimes an okay like visual portfolio can be completely elevated by a really good presentation. Because like the work is the work and it should stand on its own. But if you present it really well, like that's the other factor where I think when you're working a designer, you may or may not want to do this, but if you can present your work to a client, like that's kind of the next step. So presenting your portfolio work is sort of like the step next to presenting to clients. And part of it is like the art of persuasion, the part of like, can you sell this work by how you talk about it? And like, you're really selling yourself too. Like if you're presenting work to a client, it's you that they're buying too, not just the work. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. Like, especially when, you know, you're just out of school, you might not always know who you are either. Like you don't always know what you like to do. You might not know any of these things. So it's a bit of a theory to tell you this. But if you kind of are obsessed about stuff, it's really interesting to know what that is. And I think those are the quirks that are like innate to you. So, yeah.
Well, it's 7:30, so, and we have a whole student committee meeting.
You have a whole agenda.
Yeah, we have a whole agenda. So on behalf of the committee, I will thank you very much, Victor, for your amazing presentation. Hooray.
Thank you. I appreciate sharing. I hope it was useful and not like super boring.
It was not at all. Oh, you're awesome, Victor.
But, I leave you to discuss your students' committee matters. Farewell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Bye.
Bye.